Okay, so welcome to the topic 5.7 video where we're focusing on the economics of industrialization. So this focuses on economic systems. And when we study economic systems, the very first thing that we look at is how societies develop ways to produce, exchange, consume goods and services. This is focused on a system or an ism. So when you think about laissez-faire capitalism that you read about or mercantilism, this is what this is talking about. And then the second thing is environmental or economic systems have political, environmental, cultural, and social implications. So we're going to begin to get into this a little bit when we talk about political implications. The government's involved because they're the ones that set the conditions, either a basic laissez-faire where they just kind of create the rules and let it go, or all the way to communism or Marxism, where they totally control and own the factors of production. When we talk about environmental, we've already covered that a little bit. Culture, we're going to get into a little bit later on in this video, and social is in topic 5.9. So today, from this video, we need to answer the question, how did the development of economic ideologies and business institutions contribute to change between 1800 and 1900. So, watching this video, you're going to be able to identify what were the main changes that take place in economic systems due to industrialization in the time period 1800 to 1900. Pay attention to the isms, the new business institutions. Pay attention to how it affects people's lives. And then eventually we're going to be able to write an argumentative statement to explain how things changed and why. So, to contextualize this lesson, we always start off with the scientific revolution. The scientific revolution established an empiric worldview in which people abandoned the traditional thoughts that they were taught and began to use reason and observation to be able to make the truth out of life. And this is going to lead to new ideas and new ways to do things, especially the agricultural revolution. This is the fourth agricultural revolution in human history. And what it does is it creates new technology and new methods and applies them to the production of food. By using the foods that came over in the Columbian Exchange, the food supply doubled and less people were needed to work on the factories. So this leads to the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution was a time in which new sources of power, new methods, and new technology were applied to the production of goods. And this is what we've really been focusing on. So this leads us to today. Industrialization and modernization as it spread is going to lead to new economic philosophies in the form of isms. It's also going to lead to new business and labor structures and the ultimate emergence of what we're going to call consumerism. This is our thesis for this lesson. So what we're going to make sure that we study is what was the new ism that emerged? What were the new business structures? What were the new labor structures? And ultimately, how did these things lead to consumerism? A quick lesson on economics. Economics organizes the factors of production. So this is a system in which land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship are organized into the production of goods and services that are consumed by the society. Now, the difference is when we look at it is focused on what to produce, how to produce it, who's it produced for, and giving you some examples. So in Unit 1, the global tapestry, we had more of a traditional economic system where production was determined by tradition. So to give you an example, silk and porcelain in China was produced by families who taught their younger generation to produce it. So you have generations of not only silk producers, but also porcelain producers. And in South and Southeast Asia, you have spice producers, cotton producers. Now, how it's produced, well, it doesn't change much. The methods and the technology are passed down from generation to generation. And though China went through proto industrialization, these methods continued. Now, basically, a majority of things that were produced in traditional economics back in the global tapestry centered around the family. Most of what was produced was essentially for self sufficiency with limited trade. Then we go to mercantilism. And mercantilism is a command economy in which the government dominates and makes every economic decision for the betterment of the state and not the individual. So, what is produced is always determined by government officials, and who is it produced for is also determined by government officials. So, this brings us to the big change we're going to get into: free market capitalism. We know that the empiric worldview made people realize that mercantilism was wrong and really against individualism and the laws of supply and demand. So, what we're going to get into here a little bit later is that what to produce and how to produce it and for whom is essentially done by individuals. And when we harness the individual's interests and needs, that makes the economy ultra successful. So, the first part of this is essentially focusing on the new economic ideologies and how they changed. So, we begin with mercantilism. We know that mercantilism is essentially an economic theory that drove colonization. And the main goal was essentially to make the mother country rich, that we're trying to get a positive balance of exports over imports and accumulate lots of gold and silver. The role of colonies in this was to provide raw materials, and all finished goods were created in the mother country and sold in the colonies. So, this system was very good for the age of exploration and allowed France, Spain, Portugal, the Netherlands, and England to build these huge maritime empires, thereby changing the centers of production. It also very much led to the establishment of the Industrial Revolution because it provided those countries with the wealth needed, the markets needed, and the motivation to do it. But the problem is in mercantilism, first of all, the government and select elite people get rich, and the individuals are usually left out and forced to buy things just because the nation needs to be powerful. So our argument becomes mercantilism versus capitalism, meaning the wealth of the nation that mercantilism strives for versus the individualism that capitalism kind of provides. And the big change is that very slowly throughout the 19th century, mercantilism is going to be abandoned in favor of capitalism. Capitalism is an economic system based on private ownership of the factors of production. And essentially, because individuals own the factors of production, they are rewarded through payments and make decisions on their own. The version that we're looking at is called laissez faire capitalism, in which the government very much stays out of it, just setting the conditions for the market to work. This was created, as we know, by the philosopher Adam Smith, who began to apply the ideas of John Locke and Montesquieu, Voltaire, and Rousseau to the study of economics. And he wrote his best book, The Wealth of Nations, and was read by many business people and economists during the time period. Now, the three main features that I want to focus on here that supported industrialism and made it better were: number one, economic freedom. What Smith is arguing that the industrialists really kind of latch on to is that when people are allowed to kind of make their own economic decisions on what to buy, things will be much more profitable and the overall wealth of the nation will improve. So if you were forced to buy a school lunch made up of things you don't want to eat, you're not going to spend lots of money on it. But if you were given a variety, let's say Pizza Hut was there, Chick-fil-A was there, Taco Bell was there, and whatever your other favorite restaurant was there, you would tend to spend more money because you had freedom of choice. The next thing is an individual ambition serves the common good. And what this means is this allows people to really pursue the careers that they want to do. And essentially, because they're doing things they want to do, they're much more profitable. And it's better because we don't want somebody, say, who's being forced to dig ditches, who really is a better computer programmer, because the ditch is not going to be that good. Finally, this idea of the invisible hand. This is the natural law that's kind of ruling the economy. The invisible hand is the unseen forces that move the market. It's the interaction of supply and demand. Now, where supply and demand meet, that's called market equilibrium. And that's what we're after because this equilibrium is what's making the most money. So, as you can see, essentially, this is very, very different from mercantilism. So when we look at why this was such a big thing for industrialism, well, it's because it allowed the industrial economy to flourish. Because we're producing the best products and because we're producing at the best price, we're making the most money. And innovation and hard work is often rewarded. Now, to rein in this wonderful celebration of laissez faire capitalism, capitalism has some negatives. First of all, capitalism, especially laissez faire capitalism, really lacks a lot of equality of opportunity. Um, it's essentially those who have a head start in education and capital are much better off than those that don't. Secondly, in capitalism, you're always going to have a poor. And this is really negative. But one of Smith's students, David Ricardo, argued that, well, there's nothing you can do about poor because however you raise wages, there's always going to be those people that are making minimum wage, but at least they provide cheap labor. But to make a long story short, by 1900, a vast majority of states had pursued some form of capitalism, and the world network was capitalism. So, how did the development of economic ideologies change? Well, Western European countries began abandoning mercantilism and adopting free trade policies. And the reason why they did is because they came to embrace Adam Smith's theory of laissez faire capitalism. This made industrialism go, but it also put a lot of countries as providers, meaning they provided markets and resources. Now we need to get into the business institutions of what's going on here. When you look at it, ever since 1200, when the course began, we had two types of businesses: sole proprietorships and partnerships. A sole proprietorship is basically one owner, and a partnership is a group of people that owned. Now, both were responsible for all the debts of the company and to pay all the taxes. They could individually be sued, and if the company went out of business, then they would be in big trouble. Now, during the age of exploration, we have joint stock companies, which is a step in the right direction, but we see that these individual companies are given monopolies, exclusive rights to control trade in certain regions of the world without competition. And without the competition, we don't have the motivation for the business to be better. Plus, when we talk about individualism, we're also looking at this idea of government control. Remember, they were used to bring in wealth under mercantilism. Well, this is going to change. The best business organization for industrialism was a limited liability corporation. Basically, this is a single entity, meaning that it is a thing that is owned by stockholders who invest to finance the operations. These legal entities can and make contracts, they can be sued, and they can own property. And what really makes them special is this idea of limited liability. Limited liability means that the investor is not responsible for the debts of the company. They cannot lose their private property. And so, two things are happening here. This is allowing more people to invest in companies and become shareholders or owners. And it's also really motivating them to get involved and to make the business profitable. So, because of the need for markets and because of the need for resources, remember that industrial production multiplies and needs a continually growing market to sell its supply to. And that with the second industrial revolution, we have the need for new resources that these people don't have. Well, we have the rise of transnational businesses. A transnational business is a change, and it's a private company, which is a limited liability corporation, established in an industrial nation that is also able to conduct business in many other countries. These were responsible for extracting resources, building railroads, and selling goods in many underdeveloped countries. So when we look at some examples, we have De Beers Diamonds, which is a British company financed by a guy by the name of Cecil Rhodes. And obviously, the name gives it away. They're diamond miners, but they're a British company that is mining diamonds in South Africa and basically bringing them back to England. They are using native labor, but a majority of the wealth is going into England and not into Africa. They also sought to build linkages in the forms of railroads to link the mines to the harbors. And even Cecil Rhodes wanted to build a British rail line from Cairo, Egypt, all the way to Cape Town in South Africa that really would not only control British interest there, but make the British dominant. Now, this failed because the British never conquered all the land that they needed to do it. But this is what a transnational business does. Another one would be the Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation, the HSBC, which essentially provides loans in the form of capital, investments, and other banking industries overseas, especially in China. This was made so British companies could easily get loans in foreign nations and build businesses there. The last one would be Unilever. And Unilever makes everything that you would find in your house, especially soap. And what they began to pioneer is they began to pioneer the making of plantations for palm oil, which is a key ingredient in soap in Africa, and also factories of production in places such as the United States, Switzerland, Australia, and other areas, and they operated their business worldwide. Now, some other things that help them is going to be new financial instruments. We've already seen the development of stock markets, but stock markets during the age of exploration to sell shares in the joint stock companies were very small and very limited. Now, any corporation can sell stocks in a market to get more investors. Another thing that emerged was insurance. A company by the name of Lloyd's of London that started off as a coffee house for sailors became this powerful insurance where companies would pay premiums to the company and file claims for losses when shipments were lost or their settlements were attacked. All of these were important for business because they really promoted trade overseas. So when we talk about business industry institutions that changed, the global nature of trade and production contributed to the proliferation of large scale transnational businesses. Remember that these businesses were there to extract resources, build railroads, and to sell goods in the underdeveloped areas. Also, they relied upon new practices in banking and finance, such as transnational company, the Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Company, to get loans and other banking services, and also stocks and insurance. So, now we're going to look at the big change for people. And when we look at some of these pictures, I want you to think for yourself, what's changing? So, this is an advertisement for Frank Slidell's soap. And we see that essentially it does away with wash boiler nuisance. Basically, it's used for all purposes, no boiling, no scalding. Remember that soap is designed to not only make people clean, but to disinfect people. So, the old way for disinfecting was essentially to get in steaming hot water. Now we have soap that we can even use in lukewarm water. And not only do we use it with our own bodies, we can clean our clothes and things like that. Also, we have the perfect pose, a woman riding a bicycle. And notice that we see a corset that would allow a woman to ride a bicycle. We see the bicycle itself. And then we also see things such as leisure activities. This is an advertisement for a tennis company. Notice the rackets, the hats, the wonderful shoes. Yeah, they don't look like Nikes, the balls, and things like that. We also have the development of the first organized athletics. And not because I coach it, but really the biggest one is going to be soccer. Companies wanting to teach their people discipline and give them a little bit of an idea of unity and discipline, organized athletic teams, most of them soccer. So if you're familiar with soccer, and let's say that we focus on Arsenal. Arsenal is a soccer club in London, England, that was made from a weapons factory. When you look at Leverkusen in Germany, that came from the Leverkusen chemical slash medical company. So all these companies are hosting athletics. Now, this was not only soccer, but rugby grew out of this and American football grew out of this. And for all you people that love football more than soccer, the first American football game resembled a soccer game. But we'll argue about that later. But the point that I'm trying to make is this: we have created a culture of consumerism and a culture for comfort and leisure. When we talk about all the goods and the structure that industrialization gave us, we're now basically able to buy more stuff. And the stuff that we buy is not just for survival, it's to make our lives better, more comfortable. Here on the left, you see a middle class husband and wife standing in their parlor. You see the man wearing the nice suit and the bowler hat. You see the woman in a dress with jewelry. You see all the knickknacks. This is what I'm talking about, a culture for comfort and leisure. So the development of industrial capitalism did lead to an increased standard of life for most. I know it says some there, but I think it's for most. And It increased the availability, the affordability of a variety of consumer goods that people would buy to make their lives better. We could go on and on about this, but the point is this: industrialism led to big changes. So when we talk about reviewing what we just learned about, we begin with this topic focuses on changes in economic philosophies and business organizations that are going to characterize the industrial world economy. These changes are going to lead to developments and led to great changes in the way people purchase and consume goods. This is our thesis. So when we focus on ideologies, we're seeing the abandonment of mercantilism and the adoption of free trade capitalism across the world. When we talk about business institutions, we're talking about large scale transnational limited liability corporations that are going to rely on the selling of stocks, insurance, and things like that to be able to conduct business worldwide, not only to expand their markets, but gain access to needed resources. And then finally, when we talk about the ultimate change, the development of industrial capitalism led to increased standard of living for some, and the continued improvement in manufacturing methods that increase the availability and the affordability and the variety of customer goods led to the development of consumerism, the buying of things that you don't need to survive, and a culture of comfort and leisure, focusing on enjoying your life with leisure activities and being comfortable. So, what I would do now is I would stop, look at my notes, and I would list the economic changes brought by the Industrial Revolution. For me, there's four. Okay. You've got more new methods, or excuse me, new isms or philosophies. You've got new business practices. You've got new financial instruments, and you've got new culture. Now, I also want you to focus on continuities. What things are remaining the same? And I want you to think about the role of colonies. I want you to think about the role of the merchant. Okay. Fill this out. You can show it to me and I'll give you some feedback.